We on, Jake?
Oh,
No.
waiting for the red light. There we go.
We're good.
Welcome to the Centerville City Council meeting of July 17, 2018. Council meeting is now in session. Let's get started by having a roll call, starting with Councilwoman
Ivy
at the
Here.
end.
McEwen present.
Meekum present. Fillmore present.
Yance present.
Great. Let it be noted for the minutes that all council people are present. Let's start with a prayer thought by Councilwoman Fillmore.
Our most gracious Father, we're thankful for the opportunity to be here at meeting for the sake of this community, to come together to do the work of running this city and making decisions for the sake of this city. We're thankful for the opportunity to live here in this beautiful place, for the opportunity to live in a free land where we have this system of government. We ask that Thy Spirit might be with us tonight, that we might see the fruits of Thy Spirit, long-suffering and graciousness and kindness and wisdom, that those things might be with us and that we might be able to do this work successfully. And we're thankful for the health and the safety that we enjoy in general. And we're thankful for those who help so much in the providing of that health and that safety. And these things we say in Jesus' name, amen.
Amen. Thank you, Councilwoman Fillmore. If you all would stand with me now and do the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. This is a time of year, it's obvious we're very patriotic with our Independence Day and our Pioneer Days, and it's a great reminder anytime we say the Pledge of Allegiance of the freedoms that we have. So thank you. This is a time when we welcome everybody that's joining with us tonight. This is the time where we have an open session. This is where members of the public can come to one of the two podiums and express concerns, desires, opinions on things facing this city. Just please state your name and your address, where you're from, anybody who's doing that. So now the open session is now open.
Thank you, Mayor. Mark Oligschlager, Centerville resident, 1787 North, 300 West, and also a member of the Trails Committee. Appreciate your invitation to your work session earlier this evening, and appreciate and recognize the efforts of staff and the planning for the hillside and the master plan. And it's a pleasure to work with you on all that and for your thoughtful consideration. A couple of very brief summary thoughts that I had as we were meeting earlier. Our primary interest as a committee is timing. Right now, we had around 250 people at this open house. We've had a survey with 400 results that almost unanimously support additional trails for hiking, biking, multi-use, and preservation of the existing uses on the hillside. And so we're and with the drainage solutions, we're actually grateful if we help to bring to light and to re-energize the discussion around drainage on the hillside. We think that's a wonderful thing and a positive thing. And so if we can be the impetus to help prevent future flooding, terrific. We would also hope that we can proceed, whether it's our request would be that any infrastructure improvements that are required prior to additional uses on the hillside can be completed relatively soon, and that we might even be able to start improvements simultaneous with that, so long as we're mindful of your priorities and your concerns. We don't want to miss another grant cycle Fruit Heights was able to start well behind us and get out well ahead of us with their support, receive their grant, and they'll have trails this next spring that'll be a great benefit to the community. And so we would just hope as we work together in this process with you that we can try and find ways to move the timing along and still consider all the stakeholders in that process. And we think we can work well with the Gun Club. We don't see that footprint expanding necessarily. We think we can work well with the ATV users. It looks like that area is pretty well set and has been for many years. And so the real discussion is around multi-use trails and where they go. And what we're seeing from that drainage study, which I read very carefully, is that the location, the design of the trails will not change based upon the preliminary results that we're seeing. And I don't think those are going to change. So we have a road that needs some drainage along with the what did you call them that come up the
Inlets?
Yeah, the inlets that will help to drain. We have one existing crossing along that road. We're not creating any new connections. We're not placing any trails close to that project or process. And so the master plan design that we have in place right now would not change based upon the preliminary drainage study by Kevin Campbell. And we understand that you'd like to see road improvements. And one thing that's really important to understand from our perspective is that we are very fortunate, unusually fortunate, to have two existing trailheads, one at Twin Hollow Park and one at Parish Lane. And we have hikers and bikers that can access from those existing trailheads. I'm not going to suggest, nor do we care to debate, whether people would drive up 100 South First and try and park it along that road or up in that area by Dual Creek. But what we're saying is that we don't need that to have a viable trail system in any way. And so we're just hopeful that there's a way that we can work together to move forward and to be an extension. And sometimes, I guess just a reminder too, we very much feel a part of being an extension of the council. I think sometimes there's a feeling that we're trying to push something through, just like a developer would try and push a project through in front of the council, and we're on different sides. We work for the council, and I think we were assembled for that purpose, to have some enthusiasts that really like and know the trail systems in the area to try and advise. And we don't want to try and push a string uphill, and we don't feel like we're doing that. We feel like each of you have thoughtfully spent a lot of hours on this, and we're very appreciative of that. We just want to see if we can find a way forward. It was almost, when we had an open house and everybody was so excited, I think it would be a letdown to go too many years without having, or too long. And if we run to January, February, March, I think that's a challenge for us. And so I'm not sure what I'm asking other than just asking to accelerate it. One more point that's very important from our perspective. I heard Randy say tonight that he'd like to see a paved road. We would ask you to at least consider, if we do any sort of road improvements in that area, that they are in keeping with the character of that hillside. I think it would be unusual to have a paved road going all the way up to the Dual Creek trailhead. It's a hillside, and we're hiking and we're biking, and we're not accustomed to that. If any of you have a chance, and we talked with Steve Thacker at our last Trails Committee meeting, if any of you have a chance to drive up Farmington Canyon, or have driven this year since they've done their road improvements up there, they've done a fantastic job on federal money, of course, to get up to the radio towers, but they put down a fair amount of road base, and I think they used magnesium chloride or calcium chloride or something to bind that road together to where it's very smooth, very drivable. I know we have some slopes and some grade up there. Randy must have heard on the hallway, but we would just ask that you consider, and we respect the public works and the city engineer and so forth. We know that we're not road experts, but it would change the character of the hillside to have pavement on that hillside. And I think there are treatments that we could at least explore, and I'm not an expert, that would allow us to maintain at a reasonable cost something that would be more in keeping with the character up there. But again, my last point is we don't need that road to have a really good project up there.
Thank you, Mark, for your comments. And Mark,
Can I speak to that?
you may. It's open session, so you may come.
As a resident or a public works director, which one?
Either one.
Okay, fair enough.
We ask you state your name and where you're from.
I'm from all over Centerville.
Okay.
Randy Randall. Kevin and I actually went up Farmington Canyon this week to look at Farmington Canyon. It's paved from the bottom up 1.5 miles, and that 1.5 miles is over 12% grade. And so they've paved it to maintain it. The upper is about 6%. And what's interesting is they have 3 people that work full-time, year-round on that road. It's owned by the FAA as far as the use. The FAA pays 3 men, and all year long they maintain it winter and summer. And there were 2 dump truck loads of road base that were hauled up there. So they spend a lot of time and energy trying to keep that road good from there up to the balls up on top where they have the FAA balls where they take the traffic control. So it's a highly traveled road, and it is maintained with a lot of money from the FAA. So I just thought it was interesting. And our trail up here, our road exceeds 20%, part of it's 20% at the bottom, and it has a lot of 15% grades. And so trying to maintain it, we've tried to maintain it over the years. We've taken up a lot of asphalt, rotomill and stuff, and the water just keeps tearing it up. So that's our concern.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thanks, Randy, for your service. Thanks, Mark, for your Trails Committee and all your service on that. And I like it when I hear you talking about multi-use, because those trails, and I know that everybody's kept that in mind, is for use for multi-purposes. So thank you. We're continuing on with the open session. Is there any further comments from anyone?
I just have one, and it's related to the timing that Mark is talking about. And I guess the only thing I struggle with is if the answer is yes 6 months from now or yes 2 years from now, I get the grant cycle, but our hillside isn't going away. So I guess from my perspective, I don't feel the time pressure necessarily. I'm interested in making sure that we hear out all the concerns that are there, and that we make sure that because once uses don't go away, I think that's kind of what I'm hearing from what Lisa was saying, and other items is once they're there, they don't go away in terms of our liability and our need to maintain them. So I just want to make sure that as we do this, that we're careful and do it in measured steps. So I hear it, I'm not opposed to it, but I just want to make sure the timing is right.
We're issuing a lot of opinions here. I go back to the meeting and the open house we held. Now, it might have been a great marketing effort by the Trails Committee, but I think it was more than that. I think it was a huge response, one of the best responses we've ever seen to how excited people are about having something up there. And I think we've all responded to that. And that's why we have this task force created, and we're looking at it. It's just as with anything, there's a lot of things I'm dealing with the city right now. I just want to get wrapped up and taken care of. Things drag out too long, people lose interest. And so when people are that excited about it, then we do, in my opinion, we do our best caution necessary, and see if we can get things taken care of. So, but we're working hard at it, and we got our best people on it. So, any further open comments? If not, we'll close the open session, and we'll move on to the business of the meeting. Number 1 on our agenda is minutes review and acceptance. We have 2 meetings that we're approving minutes for: the work session on June 19th and the regular meeting minutes. So
it's actually 3 sets, Mayor, two for that night.
Excuse me, we have the follow-up. Thank you, Steve. 2 nights later on our June 21st, 2018 minutes that we had in the downstairs. So any discussion and comments on those minutes?
Yeah, I have a change, and I've written down the page, the line number, but not the minutes. Give me 1 second here to...
I have one, if I'll take care of
Okay,
mine while
take
you
yours,
look.
Karen.
Mine is from the special meeting, June 21st, page 2, and Lisa will need to see if she agrees with that, but line 30 starts with the comment, responding to a question from Councilman McEwen, staff confirmed that pay grade changes could be made at any time after an analysis is completed. And then I've added, Lisa pointed out raises would not be paid retroactively. So I thought that was an important comment, and I'm not sure if that's the exact moment, but it seemed like it, in my memory, was when you mentioned that, so.
I did mention something to that effect.
What is, that Lisa said what?
This,
That Lisa just pointed out that raises would not be paid retroactively.
So we were talking about the issue of, yes, we can implement this at any time, but it's not quite related to the pay grade issue, because again,
Right, so I might have
even if
found
you
the
change pay grade,
Yeah.
doesn't mean they get a raise. They're
Right.
two different issues. The pay grade increase doesn't automatically give them a raise, but
Yeah, I think that was the point, which is different than what I hear you saying. I think the point was that changing pay grade doesn't
Right.
mean an automatic pay raise.
yeah, so maybe.
So I
we
don't
should
know
put it
why
somewhere
Lisa
else.
would be opining on the opinion about a retroactive effective date.
Because
Well, but is that a legal
but
opinion?
it might have said, it might have been too that it was staff confirmed that pay raises could be made at any time, because I know at some point that's what was said was, we're just pushing pause. We weren't saying we weren't going to give raises at all this year. And then that's when Lisa pointed out that, yes, that might be true. They can happen later, but they would not
But
be
typically,
paid.
we don't do pay raises
Yeah.
retroactively.
You,
So Lisa and I both recall that she said that, and I'm not sure if I have it in the exact right spot, is the thing.
okay, I'm just concerned that that may be, is that being interpreted as a legal opinion that's being recorded in there as the city attorney, or were you saying, Lisa, that, see, that's what troubles me is,
I would respectfully request that on this one, because that changes the discussion from grade to raise, that we actually go back and listen to the audio on that.
Okay.
And if that's where Lisa inserted that statement, put it in. If it's somewhere else,
Put
make
it
sure
in
it's
the
in
right
context.
spot,
And
yeah.
again, if that's your legal opinion, it's fine.
Yeah, and I think I said typically, we do not implement raises retroactively, which is true. I mean, Steve, if you're worried, maybe
well, if
there's sometimes that.
well, that's different than what I heard, though. If you're saying we don't typically do that, yeah, but I thought I heard her representing that you said that we can't do that, or won't do that, or can't do
So
that.
I'm fine if they want to listen and see what I actually said and put that in there.
I don't remember it being quite so much of a legal opinion as just a statement of fact.
Yeah, that this was going
That's
to
what I would've
delay
called
those
it.
raises. If we push the pause button for 6 months, it would delay those pay raises, and we typically don't retroactively put in those pay raises.
Does that make sense?
That's what I would have called it.
Now, I
is
will
what
say
Bill said, is
that,
statement
you
of
know,
fact.
I can see Steve's concern, and because there have been some times where maybe we don't implement the pay increases, and maybe we go back to July 1, and we're at August 1st when we finally adopted it. Yeah, there might be some circumstances where a pay raise was given retroactively, but in my opinion, in this situation where we were looking at the entire structure, we were not going to go back and issue a 6-month pay raise for all employees. I don't think that was the intent.
I found it a worthwhile clarification at the time, so I thought it should be reflected in the minutes.
It's,
So maybe just
Oh,
listen
I'm not
back
in
and
disagreement that
find
we
the right spot.
reflected. I'm curious as to where it comes in. And
Agreed.
I mean, that almost sounds verbatim, because it's starting to tickle some memory when you say that, but I'd like to hear the audio on that.
Yeah, but I do agree, putting it right after the pay grade change is too confusing, because they're two very different things, because you can make increases to an employee's pay grade that has nothing to do with their actual rate of pay.
so let us listen to the audio on that.
And make a note that it might be that pay grade should say pay raise, because the following sentence is, council members Meekum and Ivy indicated they would approve raises based on the pay metrics. And so we might have actually been talking about raises in that moment, not the grades.
It's possible.
so any other changes, comments on any other minutes?
Yeah, on the 21st, on page 2, line 25, it's talking about me, and it says, she stated she believes the department head and second in command positions should be reevaluated after a study is done. Let's see, wait a minute, I need to come up. She says she would have liked to have more time and more meetings to individually evaluate each management position. What I said was that I would like to have more time and more meetings to have studied the budget, including the department head and compensation. I wanted to start them earlier and have more of them. And then down here on line 39, it's the same thing. Councilwoman Meekum repeated that she would like to have more time to evaluate each department head position individually. It was more, I wanted to have time to study the budget, including the department head compensation.
Any other comments? So do we have,
I would suggest that we table this until we hear what the actual recording was.
For the 21st, anyway.
Yes,
You can go ahead with the 19th, maybe?
we'd go ahead with the 19th.
do we table or do we motion with looking at those items? Or do we table and approve another time then?
We can go on to the other 2 minutes, and we can just table
Sure.
the one, so.
I move that we approve both sets of minutes from July 19th,
June
2018.
19th.
June.
Second.
We have a motion to second. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Great, so June 9th.
Go ahead.
Go ahead.
I was just going to say, then I also move to table and the minutes from June 21st special meeting and ask the recording secretary to re-listen to at least that section that's reflected starting in line 30.
Right. Okay,
Okay?
okay.
And could that include the changes that I'd ask for?
I think nobody has any problem. And so
Okay.
including the changes that Robin stated in the paragraph above that.
So that's a motion. Do we have a second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Great. And I was just, Councilwoman Fillmore just was going to ask about what we're doing about the 21st, and so you took care of that. Thank you. All right, so we'll move into item number 2. This is a public hearing on a zoning map amendment at 698 West Porter Lane. David Bell applicant. And so we are going to start this one out with a staff presentation by Corey Snyder.
Thank you, Mayor, members of the council. Just note, I don't see the petitioner present, so you'll need to address that matter as you decide a final decision. As requested, Mr. Dave Bell has interest in the Dave's Auto on the frontage road, our south frontage road area. I don't know if the map's up there. Yeah, technical map here. Mr. Bell owns this piece of property. It actually extends all the way to the area you see surrounded in yellow with the arrow. He also operates the business of Dave's Auto. I know it's a family operation. He's removed himself dramatically from it, but still involved. As you can see, there's a paved area behind the house, and that's in the residential medium zone, not in the commercial area. So Mr. Bell has approached the city to rezone just the back portion of that residential piece, it's residential medium, and pull it into his commercial zoning for his business. We did look at the general plan of the area and run it through the system for map amendments with the Planning Commission. Just to highlight the quick summary, this is a dividing of a parcel. So right off the bat, staff raised the issue that any rezone shouldn't be in effect while you're using a portion of a piece of property. The rights were trying to be shared on who gets to use the rights of a front half versus the back half, and splitting a zoning boundary, it doesn't meet our expectations under the zoning ordinance for how to draw zone boundaries. So if this were to be rezoned at any point in time, the rezone should not become in effect until the parcel is removed from the front half and assimilated into the commercial piece, and again, that's if it were rezoned. So there is a caveat in the staff recommendation and in the Planning Commission recommendation to you that if you do move forward with the rezone, the subdivision, the lot split, the exchange of title, whatever the appropriate mechanism to separate that lot and then absorb it into the commercial piece needs to take place to officially sanction the rezone. But on top of that, you look at the general plan policies. It's interesting. Porter Lane's kind of the division for the commercial area. You see it in the report. The north part of Porter Lane on the frontage road commercial recognizes that the commercial uses are there. The language of the Porter Walton neighborhood says from 500 west, which is interior to the east, to the more prominent single-family uses, from about 500 west to the commercial area is where the residential medium is supposed to be used to buffer the neighborhood. It doesn't define a depth or anything of that matter. It just says the residential medium and those types of uses should buffer the commercial area. What's interesting, though, in the general plan language south of Porter Lane, it has a distance limit matched into there. So I'm not sure back when that policy is created why a distance further south was created, because that's a greater distance of commercial into the neighborhood. You know, assumptions could be made. We thought the frontage road commercial was this line at the back of Les Schwab and so forth. But kind of trying to balance those expectations, staff took the position, and it seems the commission agreed, that the commercial line can be appropriately drawn where the request for rezone is, because it's the same depth as the Les Schwab. The staff also took the position, and the commission seemed to agree, that the residential medium is not what you're using to buffer from. You're using the residential medium to buffer to the deeper sections of the neighborhood, and so we didn't feel it created an inconsistency. But if you did want to rely on not rely on it, but consider what the south distance measurement would be, this falls within that distance, so it doesn't even exceed that south area. So we supported the rezone at a staff level. The commission debated. They also forwarded the same recommendation to you to rezone the property. But the caveat still is the split of the parcel needs to take place first before the rezone becomes definitively effective. So it's a positive recommendations with, I think, those two conditions.
Thank you, Corey.
How does, time for questions?
Go ahead. Thank you.
How does this affect the proposals he's had before us over the last several months on the residential medium and residential high? Is this eliminating it permanently? I'm having a little bit of a hard time with that.
The parcel that you're looking at that was rezoned, you see the two homes are on Porter. They were not part of his property. The project is this deeper lot across the entire back of that commercial area. This is the area that was rezoned residential medium, and now at 6 units an acre. And so that was rezoned. It would not affect that project from a zoning perspective. That project has its own constraints given the shape of the property. What really happens that I discussed with Mr. Bell today is, can I get my building permit tomorrow if the council passes this? So to caveat that is, well, no. First, we got to get past the rezone. Second, we need to handle the paving that went on back there with the site plan amendment. And part of the downfall of that is that the commercial buffers itself from the residential project he would propose. And him learning some of the constraints of the site plan did not make it for a delightful afternoon for a minute for Mr. Bell, because he now, if it were to move forward, he'd have to amend his site plan for his commercial stuff, meet all the requirements, then get a building permit for an additional building. So he was a little disenchanted that this year is running out of time before the season of the cool weather arrives.
But this is kind of an island piece of property without real access.
Yeah,
Right.
it's access through that lot, and it's an underutilized rear area of that home.
Yeah. Okay.
That residential property is still there.
Yeah, he would leave the front piece residential medium.
And the piece that was rezoned earlier is to the east of
This
that.
vacant piece with the home in the far back, or the structure at this point, it's not a home.
That's the one we rezoned about 2 months ago?
Yeah.
Something like that?
So is the home in front of it zoned RM?
Currently, yes. And then you have the leftover agricultural piece to the east.
So did we rezone that when we rezoned the other piece?
rezoned this?
The house?
No, that was residential medium to begin with.
So how come it was, oh, because the other piece was agricultural?
Because the other
it
piece
hadn't
was
been built
agriculture,
on.
the larger piece was.
So is there anything where we're going commercial high that would really concern you, that that's coming up that close to residence, that would go in there?
Repeat that again. Any
Is there
concern that the
anything-
commercial zoning would be?
Well, where we're going high commercial, is there anything that would go in there that would be really incompatible with the residents around it?
Well, the answer is, yeah, could you put a Walmart there under the commercial very high zoning? By technical theory, it would be eligible for a Walmart. Is it a sufficient size and area to create that? No. So it would involve a tear down and redevelopment of the Dave's Auto to change the direction of the property. Is that possible and feasible? Yes. If you ask Mr. Bell at this point in time, he doesn't see that in the next few years. But you know, people's response to different types of uses. So an example would be is if you put a fast food use here versus the auto repair, that would create a different conflict than the auto repair would be. But again, it would be eligible for a tear down and redevelopment. Probably a long-term horse bet would be not in the near future.
Any further questions for Corey? The applicant or representative, I don't see present to present their side of the opinion, the case. So I guess we will go to opening a public hearing. So the public hearing is now open for anyone that wants to discuss this particular rezoning. If no comments from the public, then we will close the public hearing, and we will go to determine if there is any further questions from any of the council members or discussion.
Let me just go ahead and put a motion on the table that we adopt ordinance 2018-15, amending Centerville zoning map by changing the zoning of approximately 0.325 acres of property located at 698 West Porter Lane from residential medium to commercial very high, based on the findings and recommendations of the Planning Commission.
Second.
There's a motion and a second. Further discussion?
So do we put in the caveats on everything that Corey has stated prior to this? Does it become a triggering event?
Is that included
Right.
in the recommendations of the Planning Commission, as I stated, findings and recommendations?
Yes, and it's also in the ordinance. I added a conditions section and a findings section, so the ordinance actually reflects those two conditions, that he will have to do the lot line adjustment or some other accommodation.
Any further debate?
Is there any penalty on someone who's,
Corey, I think it's for you.
is there any penalty on someone who has violated zoning provisions and is now trying to come clean?
Right.
Oh, there's so much. Yeah, there's all kinds of penalties. One can be immediate enforcement that's handled separate than the application that's at hand. And that's certainly a possibility. We've chosen to move more of a system of complaint or life safety, and it hasn't risen to a complaint or life safety at this point. So yes, there are penalties that way. What you're seeing that's being held out partially in this process is that when something's not done correctly, you can condition for its compliance to be in place. So you're partly doing that. You're saying you've done something with the residential piece and want to absorb it into commercial, but until it's divided off, it doesn't become effective. So you're beginning to remedy the violation that takes place. What isn't remedied is that it has been paved and is likely not in compliance with the current standards, and there is a desire of the applicant to come in and do something with that. The question is the timing of that. Right now, there is a motive in the near future to solve that condition of that, and we certainly, through the site plan process and the building permit, will easily resolve that action. But let's just say, scenario is that comes through, looks at the ordinance requirements and says, that's too much, so I'll absorb it into a piece of property and just leave it as is. Then there would be a continuing violation, and the decision would be, what's the next step of enforcement?
Any further debate or discussion? Okay, we have a motion and a second. We've debated further. Let's do a roll call vote on it, starting with Councilman Meekum.
Aye.
Councilwoman Meekum, sorry.
Aye.
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 Motion passes 5-0. Moving on to item number 3 on our agenda. This is another public hearing item on zoning code amendment CZC, say that fast 5 times, on our fence and wall heights. And our presentation again will be by Corey Snyder.
Staff's back on this matter. As requested by the council in a fairly recent meeting discussing the fences and the complaints that you've received in open session, you directed staff and the Planning Commission to go back and look at some language. There was a particular focus or extension of that concept from the complaint about what I would describe as the hole in the ordinance. What if there is a piece of property where a buffer should exist but doesn't exist? Obviously, the person who's supposed to do the buffer isn't motivated yet to do anything to install the buffer, and the constraints of the adjacent landowner in a different zone doesn't have the luxury for that buffer to be in place because they have to wait for someone else. And so the question was, is there a way to solve it where that hole is, the expectation's not there and somebody else can do some buffering to themselves in wait or in lieu of what the ordinance would have normally required, as well as still keep on the table, because it's mentioned in the motion, that between agricultural and residential as well as the commercial. Now, I took the liberty to add public facilities, industrial, and everything into that bunch when the drafted ordinance was put together. So what staff did is similar to what you saw in some other languages, is there is already an option for fencing to be increased in these larger intensity zones and have higher fences if determined to need be, and that can go up to 10 feet. So the question became what's that level? So I inserted another section, and I did it as in the language as a permitted use at an administrative level. Because the difference we're talking about is from a 6 foot that's allowed to an 8 foot, which is currently prohibited. Now, if you want to go above 8 feet, we can have further discussion whether it should stay in a permitted category or move into a conditional use category. But the 2 foot difference, from my vantage point, wasn't significant enough to say that 2 feet will create such an impact that we have to figure out how to mitigate it. Now, if you said you wanted to do a 14-foot fence, I would say maybe conditional, because then we have some shading and some other issues adjacent to properties and gardens that I would be concerned about. But a 2 foot didn't raise that level. So I drafted it as a permitted option within the supplementary development standards that a person can come in and request to an 8 foot, from a 6 to an 8 foot, and the zoning administrator is the person that would implement the conditions. But the caveats are listed out in the language. We have what we know that fences at 6 feet are not regulated by the building code, and we have chosen to leave the building code as the instruction. So people put up fences right now up to 6 feet without any reaching city approval. Think of it as your tough sheds. As long as you're under 200 square feet, you don't have to come to the city. It doesn't exempt you from requirements, but just is less of a burden to have to come in for those smaller type of situations to occur. So what we call that is, there's the other aspect of it, is there's permitted uses. For an example is, when somebody wants to build a house, you have to get a building permit, but you also have to provide a site plan for your house to ensure you have your setbacks. That site plan is checked by the zoning staff, and that's a permitted use review. The building official is looking at the plans, the zoning is looking at the permitted use review. We just combine them together in the building permit process. So think of a site plan for a home. We're just moving that. You're doing a site plan, if you will, for your extra 2 feet. You're running it by the city. And these are the caveats you're running by the city to get a permit to put. If it's, you still have the building code, less than 7 feet, no permit, 7 feet to 8 feet, they'll have to get a building permit. So there's kind of this hybrid line sitting in the building code. But this is saying, regardless of what the building code says, 6 to 8 feet is a permitted use reviewed by the zoning administrator as such. Caps it at 8 feet, so that's what you're looking at. It says the increased placement shall be limited to placement or location along a zoning district boundary between 2 differing zones. So this isn't at this point where somebody is in the RL zone next to their neighbor in an RL zone and for some reason wants the 8-foot fence. That's not a qualifying situation. It's when you're in a RL zone to a public facility, to a commercial, to an industrial. It does say that. The language also puts or between AL, agricultural, and RL. So we added that component in there, and that addresses the language of the complaint you've received in the open session. So it includes those 2 categories. But the caveat is when you're going to the higher use zone, other than the AL, RL, so you're going, let's say, from RL to residential medium, it's saying if that residential medium development that's in place doesn't have that buffer in, is missing the buffer because of a non-conforming situation or whatever the element is, you then can be eligible for the 2-foot extra height as this permitted use process. The logic behind it is the priority of the buffer is assuming that if the commercial, different types of commercial have to give different distances of landscaping with the fence. That's by the policy ordinance, that is the defined buffer that's determined that you have been sufficiently buffered. So if that buffer element that's required by code is in place, the assumption is that you don't need the additional 2 feet because the buffer already exists. You are already by policy sufficiently buffered. Whether people perceptually believe they're sufficiently buffered is a different debate, but the policy is you are sufficient. But if it's missing, you are not sufficiently buffered, therefore you can have this extra 2 feet. And then between any AL and RL zone boundary. The other thing that we increase is oftentimes you see the zone boundaries are splitting on a street and you know the commercial might be a corner lot. We're preserving the site triangle in the front yard setback. So what we're saying is that you can have the extra 8 feet along your side lot line, along your rear lot line, wherever that boundary of adjacent zone exists. But if it comes out to the front yard of your house or a commercial project that has a setback standard, you can't have the 8 feet there. You have to keep that open corridor in place. The other thing that was added that you didn't see in the last version of a draft is you have potential, and I think Randy is the one that raised it to me when we discussed it together. You have a potential where you have a developed lot that has utility easements, and utility easements are 7 feet wide, typically on a side or a rear boundary. If the fence is significant in a wind load issue, or if the utility is lying in a place that a footing would create a problem in that utility, we now have a conflict between utilities. So what we're saying here in the ordinance, and I put a note at the end of the one staff report to the Planning Commission, is there's a provision to use your easements and build inside your easements. We just have to ensure that the utilities that are existing in there are okay with it, or it's been abandoned. And so we have a provision in the ordinance is if you can do that, yeah, you can use your utility easement because nobody's using it. It doesn't take away the utility easement, but everybody's had a chance to weigh in on the matter, and they've been able to protect their interest in the utility. And if that interest is either not used, abandoned, or can be sufficiently taken care of, all right, now you can put in your footing for, because vinyl fence footing is just going to be the footings for the post. A block wall CMU is going to be a larger footing for the wind load in the cement block. So we added that in there as a safety to those 7-foot utilities that are likely on a side or rear yard. And just used our existing ordinance to cover that. And then I just throw in the last caveat. If you reach 7 feet, by the way, you have a building permit also that you've got to get for those structural load evaluations. So we took that to the Planning Commission. I tried to summarize their debate to you. Hopefully you watched it, enjoyed the long debate that finally wasn't all me saying something. But in the end, they didn't pass it. They favored the recommendation to leave the ordinance as is. They didn't favor this language when all was said and done. Lisa and I did talk. You directed this language to be drafted. This was back to the comment whether I agree or I don't agree is really irrelevant. You asked for the language. So I got you the language. We've put it in an ordinance if you like the language, or if you want to modify the language, or if you still want to toss it out because we didn't cover it correctly, let us know. But we provided you the language in spite of anybody's opinions and recommendations.
Thank you, Corey.
Corey?
Any further questions?
I have a question for you regarding the zoning administrator or may approve offense. The term may, if they've met the conditions as stated, is there any way you can deny them?
No.
Okay, so as long as they've met those conditions.
Yeah, in administrative decisions, the may is a weaker word than a shall, but the shall is a much stronger if there's something you missed too that you can't hang your hat on. So I'm not going to make the argument the may or the shall is the better one. The may is a permissive, the way it's worded in our ordinance. We use the word may, and it's defined that it's a permissive if you meet the criteria. So it still comes under that administrative. If you meet this criteria, the may is equal to a shall.
And the intent behind asking the question is to avoid any ideas that maybe the zoning administrator could be arbitrary or capricious. If they met this, they meet it.
State law is very specific now, saying that any officer implementing the rules must implement them. The appeal process is still there. We never know when somebody goes rogue. And so your appeal process to this decision would be go to the Board of Adjustment and make the argument that the zoning administrator did not follow this language, and having that semi-appellate overturn that decision. So, but I think any zoning administrator worth their weight is not going to get that arbitrary, capricious without it being quickly discovered.
Sure, but that's why I asked. I want to make sure.
It's a good question. Good question.
Any further questions for Corey?
I think you did a great job on the language.
I think so also. I appreciate you putting on all that time.
Thank you. So there's no applicant on this one, so this is a zoning code amendment that is open for a public hearing now. So anybody that from the public that wants to comment on this, the public hearing is now open. Please state your name, where you're from.
Nancy Smith from Centerville.
Avalon needs it. Thank you, Nancy.
You're welcome. Nice to be here. And thank you for what you're doing. I will admit I'm a little bit out of a loss. I haven't read the ordinance. I did watch the Planning Commission or the City Council a month ago when it was first presented. And I just wanted to lend my support for the higher fence. I'm one of those that has had the experience of being affected because of either city changes or neighborhood changes, and you have no control over that. The only thing you have control over is your own property. And so one way that does help to offset that is by being able to have a higher fence. I can tell you, had this ordinance been in place, we would have gone with an 8-foot instead of a 6-foot. But a 6-foot fence in our yard has probably improved our quality of life by 85 to 90%. I think Corey can tell you he probably hasn't had a single complaint since that fence went in. And that's how much it has helped. So I would hope that you would recognize that when people or citizens are affected, and it really doesn't make a difference, but it makes a difference to them, and if they're willing to put in the cost, it does keep their quality of life. And I think that's what our ordinances are for. They're not to take away, they're to protect. And that's what I'd like to just share with you. Thank you.
Thank you, Nancy. Any further comments from the public while the public hearing's open? If not, we will close the public hearing and entertain any further questions. If no further questions, do we have a motion?
I will go ahead and make a motion that we adopt ordinance 2018-17.
I'll second that.
We have a motion, a second. Any further discussion or debate?
I want to compliment Corey for being very professional and allowing us to go against his professional grain in the creation of the draft language. I think it does capture the intent. It's a good compromise. It lets the citizenry, if they feel so encroached, to take a corrective action that is not, going to create a huge problem for everyone else. So I think it's a fantastic compromise. Thank you.
Thank you, Corey and Councilman McEwen. Any further discussion or debate?
I just wanted to state that this is a tough one. It's that tension between different purposes for the ordinances and getting very, very complicated and detailed in ordinance that we're trying to generally apply, inviting exceptions that then maybe just get seen visually without realizing the complicated process. So then you have things going on that aren't following the process, and the process was put there for a reason, etc. But I do agree with the sentiment of allowing the buffering where it's needed and hasn't been adequately taken care of. And so that part I do very much agree with, and I appreciate staff's effort, even though it's really full of lots of tension. I don't feel 100% comfortable either way, but it was a great effort to deal with this issue.
Thank you, Councilman Fillmore. Further discussion? Okay, we ready for a vote? We'll start with Councilman Ince.
Aye.
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 Motion passes 5-0. 5-0. Thank you. We got that one through that one faster than I thought. And me being tall, I have problems with anything taller than me, so I don't know how I would have voted on that one.
Well, you'll still be
That's
able to
just a
look
joke.
you'll still be able to look in my backyard. It doesn't help me at all.
Okay.
Most backyards you can still keep over if you
Oh, great. Now we get to move to item number 4. This is a fun one. This is about Public Works fleet replacement, and we all like to play with trucks in the dirt when we were kids, so we get to hear about trucks. And we have Randy Randall here to talk to us about that.
Okay, as you are aware, we wanted to get some money so we could start replacing some of our trucks in a timely manner. And so we put out the bid to get some trucks. We want to get a 10-wheel dump truck and a 550. Over time, we're trying to change the fleet so that the trucks that we have in the winter can be more used in the summer. So we're trying to get 2 10-wheelers that can haul more dirt in the summer so we can put them to beneficial use. And then we want to buy a 550 that we can drive. Those, the trucks that we have now are kind of a medium-sized truck, and we don't get as much work out of them in the summertime. So we're kind of changing our fleet. We're trying to get 2 10-wheelers, and eventually we want to end up with another 550.
You got to tell them what a 550 is, Randy.
550 is a smaller, not a pickup truck, but a little dump truck that's smaller that we can put a blade on, and we'll utilize it more in cul-de-sacs is the purpose, in those areas in which we need to maneuver more. We'll be a little bit more at risk if we have big storms, but we think that we need to get trucks that we can use year-round rather you'd be amazed at how few miles we put on those bobtail trucks. And we've got more on our 10-wheel truck than all of our bobtails put together, and it's newer than all of them. Because in the summertime, we drive it a lot and haul a lot of material because it hauls twice as much. And in the wintertime, when we need to haul salt and put it down on the road, it gives us twice as much salt as well. So we think it's a better fit for us to get another 10-wheel dump truck and then a 550. And then also in this report, we've talked about Volkswagen, the settlement with Volkswagen. The federal government has given Utah money from that, and that money is going to be administrated probably next year. Some money will be coming out, and we'll look at that maybe for some of our purchases next year. They'll give us half the cost of a chassis, so about $45,000. We did not want to use this more expensive one this year because we're going to get a better value from the truck company. Then we'd only get $10,000 difference if we took the money from the reward from the Volkswagen. So our other trucks are only worth about $10,000. So that'll be $35,000 value to us if we trade those in at the same time. So I think it's better for us to trade in this one at this time, get a higher value out of it while we're trading. And then we'll look next year and take some of the money we get next year and try to match it. We don't know for sure how they're going to administrate it, whether they're just going to give us money for it or whether we have to buy in like kind. We don't know for sure. But we feel like this is a good price, and they're giving us a good value on the truck. For trade-in, we feel like that's a great value, so we're pretty excited about trying to update our fleet. So, any questions?
So just to clarify, Randy, the trade-in is one of the bobtails, right?
Correct.
Yeah.
Yes. One of the bobtails.
Questions for Randy on this one, anyone?
So I think what we're looking for as staff is a motion to approve the proposal and allow staff to proceed with the purchase of the 2 trucks recommended under state contract, right, Randy?
Correct. They're both under state contract.
Right.
So moved.
Second.
Motion.
This is consistent with what we kind of hashed out during the budget process,
It
right?
is, exactly.
I'm glad you asked that because I was going to say, I remember this was all within the budget.
Yes, this is within the budget.
And very well thought out. It's much appreciated.
Yeah.
Great. So we have a motion and a second. Could I do just an aye on this or a roll call? Lisa,
call.
we need a roll call? Okay.
Big dollars.
A lot of money involved.
Councilwoman Ivy.
Aye.
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 Motion passes 5-0.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Thanks, Randy.
Thanks, Randy, for that.
You gonna take us for a ride?
What's that?
You gonna take us all for a ride?
So the last guy I took
He
for a
just
ride,
did.
we ended up crashing, so,
So no.
you know, roll. Glenn went for a ride with me once, and the brakes went out, it got so icy, and I took out a tree, so, yeah, I'll take you for a ride.
Let's try as a tree. I thought it was a pole. I remember you telling
It was a
the
tree.
tree, yeah.
The tree about that big around, and climbed the tree.
On 1825 North, right?
1825. It was quite a ride. That's
Yeah.
about 15% grade, so I'll take any of you for a ride.
Come see me for the hold harmless agreement.
Is that for Randy or for any city vehicle?
Thanks.
Thank you. Next item on the agenda is item 5, park signs and designation. And in view of what we renaming of our parks, a couple parks recently, this is something that our city attorney brought up that she wanted to discuss, so we'll turn it over to her.
Thank you. After the last couple times we've renamed or named some new parks, and after we named the William R. Smith Park, the council directed staff to look at all of our documents, our ordinances, our general plan, our website, and we've been doing that and trying to make a lot of fixes as we go along whenever we see the Founders Park, trying to fix that with all of our publications. So I went ahead and searched the city ordinances, and we actually didn't have any of our parks named. So this ordinance is not necessary, and I will agree under my own listing, it's a so what ordinance. But I felt like when I searched the ordinances and there wasn't really any mention of our parks, that we should highlight our parks. So it's for more of a subtle purpose, but let's highlight our major parks because I feel like our ordinances are more accessible than our general plan, which we haven't converted to the municipal code online, and they're not searchable. And I also think it's a good thing to highlight for the families. They can see that here's the park name, and we have a quick location if somebody really wants to know where our park's located. And also, it solves our problem because the first one we renamed by motion and the second one we renamed by resolution, which I thought was a good way to put it so we could have all the findings and things like that. But this way we will formalize the naming, and then next time it'll just be an ordinance amendment if we'd like to change the name. That doesn't mean that you have to stick with these names. It's up to whatever council would like to change them, but it at least provides us with a process for that change. So I'm just recommending this quick fix, and I'd already been working on it, and I saw that we had the parks on here, so I asked Steve and the mayor if I could just stick it on there. And I will plan on bringing back an amendment to the general plan later, not a priority project, but there are a number of spots there where we name these parks that we'll have to do some fixes. So I'm just recommending this quick change.
So any questions for Lisa on ordinance number 2018-08?
-18.
-18.
Sorry. It's on
I'd
the
make a
agenda, so,
motion to-
wait, it's 18 here.
I would make a motion to approve 2018-18 as submitted.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Any further discussion? Councilman McEwen.
Aye.
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 Motion
Thank you.
passes 5-0. And I gave Lisa a little heartburn on this because I called her on last Thursday. I said, do we really have to create a document? Because I don't like to create documents we don't have to. But she convinced me that in lieu of what we were doing with all our parks, that it was highlighting our parks.
It's the best
And I
so
like
what
that
ordinance
part.
we've ever had.
Yeah. I like that part, that we were highlighting our parks. So we have the second part of this, B, park signs, options, and fundraising. Was that something that you were going to discuss, Steve?
Yes, I'm just responding to council's directive to bring you some information about cost of signs depending on the type of sign. You have two parks you want to put some signage in. Potentially one is the Smith Park and the other is the Wildlands Park. So Dan Sontag did give me the information that I've included in the packet, and then I've got some more information just as of today regarding the more expensive monument signs that we have done a number of in the city. But if we could refer first to the information from Dan, if you put up the drawing, as far as Founders Park goes, you have a wooden sign there now that's replaced what was there, and I don't know if it's intended to be your permanent sign or just temporary.
No, it was just so that we had something there
Okay.
for it was a 4th of July special.
Okay, all right, so what Dan has said is you could, if you just want to replace that wooden sign, leave the pillars there and replace the wooden sign with either a nicer wooden sign or a metal sign. He's given you an example there. Doesn't have to be exactly like that, obviously, but he's saying that's, I think, 1,500 to 1,800. Is that what he's got in there? Something in that range. If you want to replace the pillars as well, then he's saying it's in the neighborhood of $6,000. If you want to go with a monument sign, similar to what we've got in our other newer parks, let's put that up. That's an attachment that was added today, existing signs, I think it's called. Go to one of our parks. That's Porter Walton. That's a larger monument sign. Go to one of the other ones. This is the cemetery, smaller. This is also Freedom Hills, which is smaller than the Porter Walton Park sign. Kevin dug into his files and emailed this to me today. That 10 years ago, we built 3 of these. and the cost averaged about $10,000 each. Included the foundation and footing and the rock work and the concrete sign itself. Did not include electrical if you want to light it, and then repairing landscaping around it. So just the sign and the foundation of the sign was about $10,000 each. That was 10 years ago. So we could assume probably at least an average of 3% inflation per year since then. That would add another, I'm going to guess you're up to around 12 to 15,000.
Well, I'm surprised because I met with you and
Dan?
Dan Sontag, and we had actually paid him because you had some little money left over with him. And he came through and told us he thought we could do one like Freedom's Hills for between 4,000 and 6,000.
Well, I've heard him say 6,000 to 8,000, but
I have the papers that he gave us that he wrote on that day.
in an email more recently, he has, I think, said the 6,000 to 8,000, or in a conversation this morning. Was it this morning or yesterday morning, Mayor? It was this morning, wasn't it?
It was this morning.
Yeah.
Been a long day,
Well,
Steve.
yeah, we met with Dan and
Started at 8.
and Aaron from Hogan this morning. This morning he did say, this was before we had Kevin's information. Dan was thinking 6,000 to 8,000 for one of these monument signs, but Kevin has shared this with Dan now, and so I don't think Dan's still saying 6,000 to 8,000.
Okay. The family's working on getting donations, so I will let them know that. They all are trying to maybe get some relatives to maybe even do some of the work that are in that profession. So I'll let you know, where they're coming from with that.
And you and I need to coordinate, because I've talked with Dean Smith, who was here that evening, who used to be CFO at Davis Behavioral Health, and I was on their board. And he called me up, and we chatted the other day, and he wants some options, and so we need, between our two contacts, see if they're on the same page as far as how much they're willing to donate. Dean hasn't told me.
Okay.
So, but I told him we were doing the study.
Right, and I haven't got any figures from
Yeah.
them either. It's just, and they've asked me what it would cost, and I was surprised when I went just trying to get a wood sign, how much it was.
So, Robin, are you sure the 4,000 to 6,000 wasn't his estimate for replacing the existing pillars and a sign between them?
No, it was the one that I have, I looked at the other day, was 4,000 to 6,000, and it was, I think it was the Freedom Hills one.
Because in his email, he has actually
But
used
that
the
was-
$6,000 estimate for replacing the two pillars and a sign between them.
Right.
So these monument signs would be more expensive than that.
I'll have to, I've got the papers. I'll pull them back out and look at them and come down and talk to you about them.
Do the pillars have to be replaced, or can we just?
No,
We can
they
use the
don't.
same pillars if they want, just depends on how.
Go back to
I mean, the
the
family
Freedom
kind of
Hills
wanted to
Park.
go bigger, so I said, if you've got the money, let's go bigger.
No.
This
It's
is,
all in the money.
if you replace the pillars, this was Dan's illustration of what the pillars could look like, new pillars. But if you just use the existing, that's what he's saying.
And I think the family actually wants to go with the old Centerville rock.
Meaning these pillars that are already
Right,
there.
but maybe
there.
do something bigger and better, but I think that's more what they're thinking of.
And he just, this is his sample engineering drawing, he didn't, because it doesn't match the styling of any of the others, so I was just curious where he
Right.
went with this.
Yeah, he was just, he was asked to provide a range of costs for different types of signs.
Was
so
that Dan who drew that up, or the sign
this was
sign
Dan.
company?
Dan did this.
Okay.
Well,
Because-
I mean, I don't know if the sign company did it for him, or maybe they did.
He said in his thing that the sign company
Provided this.
provided the design.
This is the sign company's material, and I will say that it was strange because it was in conflict to Dan's suggestion, which is we get consistent, we get more consistent with our signs. So I think that this is beyond, I think this topic should maybe go a little bit slower. I mean, which is fine, it gives the Smith family time to fundraise, right? But, because there's a policy question underlying that here, and that is, do we desire to have consistency and try to have that recognizable, here's a Centerville Park, and you know it because all those signs look the same.
Correct.
So,
And that's what stood out to me this morning in our meeting as I looked at all these drawings. I thought it'd be nice to have uniformity.
Yeah, I think so too.
Yeah.
The other existing signs.
I think the template's already been cast in concrete, no pun intended, so I think that's where we end up.
Well, and I think though, Robin, I think what Kevin's given me today, at least in
It's
my
probably
opinion, is
more
probably
accurate.
more realistic, yeah.
Yeah, I'm not arguing that point. I'm just saying, you know, I had given the family, so I've given them
Okay.
the false numbers and so, and you know, some of them can maybe talk to the monument companies and see if we're, that's all free if they want to do it, so.
Yeah. And then so you have the Wildlands Park as well. You want to go with the same kind of theme there and suggest the fundraising effort target?
I think you're running into size constraints up there.
Yeah. Smaller version of,
and a very different sort of park.
Right. The first thing that comes to mind is basically almost like a single pillar with the sign in the middle of it, just something.
Or almost like a
tiny.
trails kiosk, you know, I mean,
Right.
kind of thing, where it just is such a different nature of a park.
Since it's supposed to be unobtrusive anyway relative to what we're doing with, the smaller the better. I mean, enough to be seen, but it doesn't have to be that size.
so do you want Dan to take a couple hours and generate some ideas for you? An idea of a sign that, he did go up there this morning after he met with us to look at it, because I've asked him to think about what might be appropriate for that
Yeah,
wetlands.
which would be great, but I think what I just heard George said I actually really like, and that's the idea of taking like just one of those pillars and then just a plaque in the face of the pillar, which
that's a
would
good thing.
be consistent with existing signs, but also very much fit up there.
It fits, its footprint is nice relative to the area. It can't support a larger sign than that, really.
So that one seems easy to me.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
mean, we could get you a cost
Not worth,
estimate on that.
not worth spending a bunch of money to have somebody design it for us.
We can get a cost estimate for something that simple. I assume we need that for the fundraising target, right? Okay. And then unless you have other comments or discussion about those two parks, I wanted to bring up a related issue.
I just
Signage.
wanted to say, good job, Robin. When my children were driving by, they said, Mom, look, it's the real name of the park. And they could see it from the road, so good job.
Yeah, you
and
can
and
read
they'd
it.
never noticed the name of the park prior, so I think it really pops.
It did, yeah, you
Good
can
job.
read it, definitely.
And I didn't want to offend you because I thought it was great. I didn't know if we were going to go with more. Dean and I went golfing, and I didn't bring up we had a sign up already. So
I hoped when they seen that, they didn't figure, but we just really wanted something up for the 4th,
Yeah.
so we just,
So I'm shifting the discussion to a third sign unless you have other comments or discussion about these two.
no, I think
Go
we
ahead.
go on the third sign.
The third sign is really, strictly speaking, an RDA subject, but I'm going to bring it up here and hope you have no objections to what I'm about to suggest. When I came to you...
I asked him to do it, by the way, too. So
When I came to you with the cost estimate for Dan to redesign that southeast corner of 1250 West and Parish, I spaced the fact that I should have also explained to you that that was based on the assumption that our city engineer would provide a site survey with elevations and the features existing there and the underground utilities and those kind of things, which is necessary for Dan to do the work that he proposed, which included, for his $1,200, Dan's $1,200 included like a 3D model so you can see how it will actually appear on that corner with all those other obstructions there. So Kevin can do that site survey for $900 if he can do it with his crew when they're in the area doing other surveying. What I would like to know, we have a budget, an engineering budget in the RDA budget, which is like $7,500, and I would like to take the $900 out of that for this piece of work by Kevin. Unless you have objections to that, that's what I intend to do. There's already budgeted money in the engineering line. But in order for Dan to go forward, he's got to have that site survey. Any objections? Okay. Okay, so we met with Hogan this morning, the mayor and I, Hogan's rep, and talked about this. We've got him, Aaron Metcalf of Hogan, and Dan now linked together. They can work together on this kind of as a design-build approach. But we'll go ahead with the site survey and then get Dan working on it. Thank you.
So, just as part of this, it's my understanding that we do not have a sign. All of a sudden, I'm losing the name. The park up by you, Stephanie.
Island View.
There is no sign at Island View.
There are 2 signs at Island View. They do not look anything like the ones that we have the rest of the parks.
So we need to keep that in mind as we design the project improvements there, yeah. Good point. Yeah. Okay, so I'm through with that, Mayor, unless you or the council have something to do with signs.
Any further signs that you guys can think about?
Do we want to just take a minute and report what we voted on the other matter?
What?
I'm just telling you the truth. We had this.
Come up here, we can hear Dave.
All I can do is speak the truth. We missed family night last night. We had family night tonight. We went to go see, by the way, it's the Mr. Rogers. And we just left it, and all of a sudden it hit me. Oh my gosh, I missed the city council meeting. So I'm sorry. I am very sorry, and I guess I'm going to ask now.
We missed you, but
We
we
could
voted
put you
for
in
you.
suspense and say, rewatch the YouTube video.
It was pretty fast and quick and dirty matter.
I
so
just can't
it was,
believe
went just
that
fine.
I forgot it, because I was actually talking to Corey today about it on the phone at work, and then I come home and dinner, and all of a sudden, hey, it's $5 Tuesday at the movies, and that's what we did.
That's what everyone always tells us when they leave.
It
is that
sounds
it's
really
$5
fun to go to
Tuesday.
Yeah.
Tuesday.
We don't get to enjoy that one.
Anyway,
They all voted, so I'll let one of them announce the results, you know, so.
Well, we decided that the first tour free, the next rezone costs money. Or you need a punch card or something.
Anyway, thank you for your service, and I am sorry that I wasn't here. I apologize. Thank you.
Thanks for the report on the movie.
Yeah, it's a good, because we're all old enough to remember Mr. Rogers. I'm telling you what, man, that's a good movie.
Oh, yeah, we used to sing it in college, beautiful day in the neighborhood all the time. Thanks, Dave.
It was a unanimous approval, so good luck with the line changes and site plan and all that you have ahead.
If I'm not here again, it's all
We'll text you. Say you're up.
See how easy we are to work with? We just say yes even when you're not here.
Just don't show up.
Corey's awaiting your call.
Thank you. Okay, we got through the signs. Item 6, compensation study proposal.
Okay.
Steve,
Thank you.
we'll turn that over to you.
Okay, well, in pursuant to your direction, we have secured a proposal in order to identify potential consultant to ask the proposal from. We did send an email out, Jake did, to Utah city managers asking if they'd had a study done in the last 3 years and who had done it. And Jake, 14 responded, was it?
14.
And 12 of those have used
Mike Swallow Services,
Personnel Systems and Services is the name of his company that he goes by to do these studies. But he is also the guy that provides the TechNet service that is the benchmarking data thing that many, many cities participate in. His proposal is there for you to review. I've reviewed it carefully. Jake's reviewed it. I'm quite comfortable with it. I have a few questions I want to ask Mike to confirm whether this is included or that's included, and what does he mean by this and that kind of thing. We tried to connect with him yesterday and today, but he was not available, so we have those questions still to ask. We We don't feel like we need to include the HR audit portion, which is $2,000. That would take the cost down to $10,000, a little over $10,000, which is very reasonable. One of the other, I mentioned the 12 of the 14 that had used Mike Swallow. One of the others was Clearfield, who has used a company called McGrath out of the Midwest. Jake and I met with the assistant city manager of Clearfield for a good hour, I would say, to review their experience and their product. Very similar in terms of process and product and what you get. It includes an evaluation tool where you value each position in order to put them into a hierarchy relative to each other, but then a benchmarking to the competition and establishing a range for each position rather than trying to put positions into pay grades where you may have several different types of positions within a pay grade, the same pay grade. Each position has a range relative for that position based on the market data. Clearfield paid $30,000 for theirs. They are a bigger city, so they, I assume if we went with a company like that, it would be something less. I think this was 2 years ago that they
Yeah, it was 2 years ago.
got their proposal and proceeded with their study. I'm guessing ours would probably be in the 25,000 range at this point. Interesting enough, though, McGrath uses TechNet's data. They subscribe to that database and use that information, at least for most of the comparisons. Now, they did go out to the private sector to gather data for some positions that are more private sector oriented, like IT and some finance positions. And Mike Swallow has indicated in his proposal that he can do that as well, tap into some private sector data where we think it's appropriate. I'm generally pleased with the proposal. If you got concerns, I need to hear your concerns and whether they can be addressed in the modifications to the proposal. Whether you've got questions you'd like to ask him, we can arrange for him to actually come if you'd like and speak to you directly and answer questions directly. Another option is that one or two of you could join the mayor and me and Jake as we call him and seek answers to some questions that we still have, and you could ask your questions at that time. So there's some options if you're supportive of going forward likely with this, but need some questions answered, then we could get some answers.
I'm just curious if when you asked for responses from cities who've done this process, did you get a feel for if it changed what they were doing drastically or a little bit, or?
We didn't get that detailed in the question, did we,
Okay.
Jake?
Yeah, there's only a couple of cities that I talked to. No, not really. It
You
didn't
didn't
change
get
a
that
whole
kind of
lot.
feedback.
No, I didn't.
No,
Yeah, I was just curious.
we didn't ask for that.
Yeah.
So American Fork didn't adopt this pay range scale?
American Fork, yes, they did adopt this. They were one of the cities that went through. I don't know how long ago they went through that, though. It's not the current city manager, though. He came into it.
So, Steve, if we go by the rule of threes and quotes, are we able to get 3 bidders on this? Or, I mean, we've got the one, you've talked about the other uses a similar data source. Have we solicited a quotation from them just to get a benchmark on pricing?
No, we have not. I just can't believe, though, that, and it's professional service, we don't have to have the 3 per our purchasing policy. This would fall in the realm of identify a company that you think does quality work and you can negotiate a price. I don't for a minute think we're going to find something more cost effective in terms of, or more economical out there.
Yeah, that's not really the debate item for me. It's not so much that it's procurement policy, it's just benchmarking. For me, is this good value for dollar if the other 2 bids are $20,000 higher, for example, yeah, it's obviously good value for money. I don't know that necessarily I would want to go through a whole RFP process.
Yeah, that would
But
be-
at least to have quotations of a similar magnitude, because there's a relatively simple statement of work here and an engagement period of about a month. I'd be interested to see if the other parties are in line or are far out of that, just for getting it settled in my mind that this is the best value for the dollar, because it's a significant investment and it's going to have potentially long-lasting effects for city employees. So I'd like to make sure we get the right product for that.
We can do that, especially if you are not requiring a full-fledged formal RFP, but are saying, reach out, describe the basic scope of service that we would like, what would be the range of cost, what would be the approximate time it would take them to do that. Is that what I hear you saying, George?
Yep. In fact, I would reach out to the parties and say, hey, if you look at our minutes and this is the attached, this is the scope of work that's currently being considered by the city. And then
The
it's
scope
on
of
them
work
whether-
from this proposal.
From
here.
this proposal.
Yeah,
I mean,
yeah,
this,
and that'd be simple.
This is effectively the scope of work right here.
Right.
So rather than investing a ton of time trying to educate them on it, I'd say this is what is out there in the public domain. If you're interested, throw a number past the city.
Yeah, we could do that.
And spell it right.
And do what?
And spell it right.
Spell what?
Just in the page 18 of the sample, the graph in the top left corner is missing a P in complexity, but,
Oh,
just, if we're working about details and, I like to see that they can spell the words, but.
So I did have one question. He gives on page 8, the price gives it what's labeled as a 15% discount, which is really a 20% discount for the TechNet data.
I think he's saying there because we're already a subscriber to TechNet, which we pay, what, $300 a year for?
400.
400 a year for that service
How long have we paid that?
per year. Well, we've been paying it for quite a number of years. That's where we've been drawing the data that we've been giving you.
I guess I'm a little bit surprised at the amount of a charge for access to a system that we already should have access to.
Well, this is not just access to the data, it's him taking that data and probably trying to carefully match up what are the appropriate comparisons within the database. And
Okay. In
Steve-
other words, somebody that you have labeled as going back to the budget process, somebody that you have labeled as
well, there was a comment about Parks and Rec, for example.
Parks and Rec.
You don't just take all the Parks and Rec directors and compare them. You need to be more familiar with what the scope is of their work. Do they have a rec center, et cetera?
Okay.
I mean, I think he's going to try to help us be more precise in our comparisons there.
Yeah. So how many cities in your benchmarking do you use?
It depends on the position.
For
Approximately,
non-management,
a range.
do you remember like 30 or 40?
30
No,
or
it's probably more like 20.
For
It's probably about
for the
20.
non-management?
Yeah, for the non-management.
And so how
I'm thinking
many
it's
of the cities that responded would be cities that we'd be benchmarked against in the process we already use?
I don't know who responded.
A couple, a few, a lot?
I'd
Tammy,
probably say
could you
about
speak
half
in your
of
mic a
them.
little bit? I'm having a hard time hearing you on this side.
About half?
Oh, there
Yeah,
we go.
well, see, and I asked most of the cities that are, it was most of the cities around here, actually, that responded to me. There was a few
Okay.
down south, like Saratoga Springs,
Okay.
Merritt Ford.
So, I mean, just something to keep in mind when we do decide if we want to spend this money, which this seemed fairly affordable, and more information is better than less. But it kind of seems like we're almost working in circles, because if The cities that we're benchmarking against have also gone through this process with the same consulting firm and then adjusted their pay and salaries based on the results of the process. And we're benchmarking ourselves against them. Then how is going through this process and changing according to the information that we got different than benchmarking against the cities who've already done it?
I don't think it will be much different.
So that's to be thought about
That's
before we
one thing I
decide to spend
said
the money.
after the call ended with Jake and Steve. I was there on the call that morning. So,
Yeah. No, I can't argue with that. I mean, you know where I've come from with my recommendations in the past. I would note that what Mike Swallow, if you choose to go with him, would do as part of his work is he will be seeking from you your directives as to two issues. What is the market you want to be compared with? You know, the cities in this range, and where do you want to bring the private sector into for what type of positions? And then the other is, do you want to be at leading edge city in terms of what you pay? Do you want to be parity? Do you want to be reasonably comparable? If you read his proposal, he uses 4 terms that represent different kinds of comparisons. So he would be seeking from you your direction as to what is our target in that regard. So what is our market you want him to compare to, and what is, how do you want to compare to that market? And Bill, that goes back to your question. That's part of that labor market and wage analysis. He's going to want to know that from you in order to take the data and tailor it according to those directives that you provide.
Steve, is Program C in answer to our question of additional services, and that's one that we wouldn't have to do?
Yeah,
Right.
we would need that one.
Is that when we asked, I asked about additional services?
Well, this is an option in his proposal, and we're, as staff, we're saying we don't think that's needed. But the additional services would be shown down below on page 8, ongoing, and we're not recommending that either. There are not many cities that actually pay a monthly retainer fee to use his services. I don't think that's really a good deal there.
Oh, yeah, but I don't recall discussing that.
I think if we go with him, we ask him, hey, would there be an option where if we have a new position or a redesigned position and we want it evaluated, what would you charge us to do that? And if it's $200, $250, for example, for a position, maybe that's a route we go, just on an as-needed basis.
Okay.
To do that. I will say that the McGrath company that Clearfield used, they have that kind of arrangement with their consultant that when they need to have a position reevaluated and rescored, that company helps them do that for $250. Now, we had our current evaluation tool, position evaluation tool, was developed in the 1990s, just a few years before I came in '98. And so that's the tool we've been using since then. In essence, what this would do is update that tool that values positions, the worth of work, he calls it, to establish that internal relationship among positions. And then, of course, benchmarking, as many of those positions that have good benchmarking, he would benchmark to the market. For those positions that don't have good benchmarking, the internal relationship helps establish that appropriate band or range associated with it. Once the new tool is in place, I do believe that, as Jake and I have been doing over the years, and Blaine and I did when he was finance director, we would administer that tool in most cases ourselves, but occasionally we brought in Mike Swallow to help us evaluate a new position. But it was using the tool that was developed in the 90s, the evaluation tool. Similar factors: knowledge, responsibility, difficulty of work, environment, and each of those is broken down into subcategories and points assigned. His updated model is clearly more sophisticated than the one in the 90s that we've been using over the years. It has more refinement to it, more precision to it, more choices, if you will, that lead to the points. If I put it up, if this, for example, if I showed that to you side by side with the tool we've been using, you would see that there's a lot more choices where the more discretion, refinement, if you will, as you evaluate.
More data collection point.
Whereas in the old tool, there was one number per box. Now there's 3 numbers per box.
So
what is your
Steve?
wish, council?
That's what I was going to say. So I don't know if we're leaning towards what George's saying, that we want couple additional proposals, or where you're at it. Where are people at on it?
I believe it would be worth seeing at least one additional proposal, preferably 2, but at least 1. And so once we've got the one company, let's go that direction. I'm pleased with what I'm seeing and with the cost and the timing. But I think it's worth getting at least a second opinion.
I'd like to see at least one more proposal. I feel like we're kind of in a circle here, all the same information being used to feed the next guy in line so that it's all the same. And if you don't break out of that, then you don't know what you really have. So I'd rather see some additional, and the discrepancy in the percentage of discount, what it says it is versus what it really is, and the little glitches in spelling, that doesn't increase my comfort level that there's going to be really careful work done. So I'd like to see some additional bids.
So is that just the recommendation to him? We don't need to do a motion on this or anything, do we? Or is everybody, how do we feel about
We're
that?
okay with the staff direction just to obtain more bids.
Yeah.
Okay.
What was that?
So what they're looking at, Steve, is at least one more proposal to obtain at least one more bid.
We can try 2.
Preferably 2 if
Good.
you can get it better. Yeah.
Okay.
Okay, we good on that one? Lynn, are you waiting for Bruce to come? Or is it just going to be you? I mean, we're before your time, but the other things doesn't involve you. If I skip ahead to yours. You ready to go? Yeah, if you don't have anybody else coming, you're here, and the other things are just reports from myself and Steve and Councilman McEwen. So,
Mayor, if I could lead out with some context while Lynn's coming up.
The video? Yeah.
We, at the end of May, I received an email, I don't even remember where it came from, but notifying me of this national fitness campaign thing, where they have this national fitness campaign has put 100 of these fitness courts in the cities across the nation this year, and they're planning to do 200 next year, and so they're looking for cities that are interested. I forwarded that to Lynn and Bruce, just as an idea to think about whether that's something we would want to consider in the future. And and I forgot about it at that point until late in June, when we got an email from the county telling us that within the next 3 or 4 days, there was a deadline for the tourism tax grant applications. And I sent that email out to 4 or 5 people, including Bruce and Lynn, saying, hey, can you think of anything that might be eligible here as a project for this tourism tax money? And that's when Lynn then came back with, well, he linked the earlier idea of the fitness court as possible project for the tourism grant money. We don't bring this to you because we feel like this is a priority that should get some city funding at this time. My assumption is that if we pursue, if we went ahead and turned the application in because there was a deadline we were facing, but with the understanding we were going to come to the council and see how you reacted to it. We're not recommending city money be put into it. It's only going to fly because we don't have RAP tax money available to put into it. So it's really only viable if we can get other funding sources for it. And so with that context, I'll let Lynn share what he has learned about it.
Thank you. Yeah, like Steve said, at the end of May, he sent me the email. It's from the National Fitness Campaign. And if you've got the link up, let's just watch that and I'll show you what it is that they came up with. It'll explain a little bit about what they do.
We returned in 2018 and built partnerships with over 100 cities. We've raised over $15 million to help make fitness a priority across America, and we're just getting started. Let's make world-class fitness free for everyone. Hi, I'm Mitch Managis, founder of the National Fitness Campaign. National Fitness Campaign started in 1979 when we invented the fitness court. Our first two fitness courts were at Stanford and San Francisco, and the mayor and Wells Fargo Bank got behind the programs. We opened fitness courts in 4,000 cities across America. We're introducing a new fitness court for the 21st century and launching a new national fitness campaign. The fitness court will allow you to use your own body weight to get a perfect workout. Our 7-movement, 7-minute system allows you to get a full body workout in just 7 minutes. 45 seconds of work at each station, followed by 15 seconds of rest. The system is progressive, so people of all fitness levels can use it. Easy or hard, it will work for everyone. You can come to the fitness court and do any workout. If you're training for a Tough Mudder or if you're running a marathon, the fitness court will work for you. You can download our mobile app, learn our routines, and take some of the fitness challenges. This will allow you to compete on the fitness court against your own score and against your friends. Campaign partners and sponsors will be providing exciting new elements in 2019. Digital training moves to Apple Watch audio guides. Regional training camps in 18 cities. Fitness court classes nationwide. The Fitness Court Challenge Series with local, regional, and national events. We're joining forces with city partners to build 200 fitness courts across America in 2019. NFC provides $30,000 in grant funding to match city adoption and local funding. National Fitness Campaign is a social enterprise and I take no salary, so all the money we raise goes directly to building fitness courts across America. We see the fitness court as the next step in the evolution of outdoor infrastructure.
I think it's amazing.
I love the fact that this is here and it's been here. It's awesome. You can do a ton of different kind of workouts here.
And at the end of the day, we all want a healthy, active community, no matter where we live.
We envision fitness courts joining basketball courts and tennis courts as essential elements of healthy infrastructure in cities and schools.
Pickleball.
Our goals are big, but the need is great. We're excited to work with you to build fit communities. Join us as we showcase the results of 100 cities who've partnered with us in 2018. Let's make world-class fitness free for everyone.
What attracted me to this was not only the fitness court, is that they show a location in Utah, but nobody can tell me where it is, so I'm not sure. But is that they provide $30,000 upfront money. They provide you with professional fundraising. They don't expect that they go out to corporate sponsors for the majority of the funds for this. They did say, you know, if you notice up there, they said there's a $30,000 community, which they asked from the cities. And basically, I told them we didn't have any money. You know, that we're not going to build this thing in 2019. they said, well, we can help you raise the rest of the money, and a lot of their corporate sponsors are national companies like Walmart and some other companies that have participated in this. And they also approach health companies, health and insurance type companies that are promoting fitness, and that they would help us raise the rest of the money by providing them with promotional material, references of companies that they've used in the past that they've had positive results from. And so they have done this without any city money. But when Steve said that we had a possibility of getting some grant money from the county, I said, well, let's see if we could, if this would go ahead. There's two other issues, at least two other issues with this. One is that we're in the middle of doing we've just started a master plan. And so I did contact Paul and ask him to take a look at this and see how this might fit into the community and how it would rank among the other things that we're going to do. One of the advantages of the county money is you don't have to use the money. You have to have your project completed within 3 years. So even if we got the money, we wouldn't have to do anything with it until, you know, for that 3-year period, which would be till 2020, which is about when we've eaten up all of our RAP tax money anyway. The ground only takes up about 40 by 40. I've talked to the people. Their preferred location, one of the other issues is their preferred location would be in the Wildlands Park, simply because it's close to a designated bike path and is in the middle of town and is surrounded by potential corporate sponsors with Walmart, Home Depot, Target, and other national companies around it. It takes up about a 40 by 40 plot. We can't put it in Island View. I've checked and we couldn't say, okay, this is the court that we designated. We couldn't use our matching funds to do that according to the state. So Porter Walton that's one of the issues, is it would have to go in Porter Walton. The other issue is I asked them, and I think I included, did you include the application form in the, see, if you'll take a look at that, there are some things in there that before we would proceed, we would need to get you guys comfortable with. On the second page, it says, has the site been approved? And the site would be Porter Walton, so we would have to get buy-in from the city council. That would be okay. On the next page, would it confirm that your fitness court will be open and available for public use in 2019? Then it says, how would you raise the rest of the money? And my intention would be to say that the money would be through local sponsors or local sponsorships, grants, but no municipal budget or bonds or discretionary funds from the city. However, and then what kind of fundraising support? It would be finding local or state grants, custom sponsor material, custom site support and planning, and references from them. And then the question is, if local fundraising is unsuccessful, does the city school still intend to proceed in 2019? And my answer to that would be no. On the next page, it says, in consideration of the fitness court being funded through the NFC sponsorship program, will you allow the permanent identification of major sponsors on the fitness court sign theater? If you'll notice in the video, that whole front wall is full of corporate sponsorship logos. And it would be their intention that that companies who substantially contributed to that would have permanent corporate sponsorship logos on that front wall, which I know some of you have some reservations about. And then it also asks in there, it says that would you promote sponsors who have supported the campaign and join relevant regional, national events and promotions. If we also have the sponsorship up there, I don't know exactly how much more that would involve. So before we proceeded with anything, I wanted to let you know what the application would be, and Again, it wouldn't be until 2019, so we would have to wait on what the master plan said and how this fit into the community, and we would have to let them know that that would have to be completed and that the fundraising would have to come from other than city funds if this was to be successful. But given that, I guess my question is, the big question is are you okay with Porter Walton Park if it goes forward? And secondly, are you okay with corporate logos on the walls?
Let me ask you this, Lynn. That study is going to come back. Is it going to recommend additional recreational items we need in our parks, or what's that going to show?
It's supposed to come back and show that, for instance, that if it may come back and say the city doesn't have any pickleball courts and this is the big thing, so we want to put pickleball courts in, and the best location for it might be to the community park. Because there's already a place there that was designed for tennis courts, and it may take the place of those. Or it could say, you know, I doubt very much that he would come back and say you need a swimming pool. But, I mean, those are the kinds of things that I expect him to come back and say, here's what the inventory of the amenities that you have. Here's what our determination is of what the citizens would like to see in the community, and here's where you're lacking.
I think they'll want a splash pad. Just saying.
Yeah, I know.
Well,
I'm pretty sure that's what it'll say.
you led right into my theme, pickleball. I have been playing pickleball at Farmington. Last night, there's 8 courts there. I had 3 Centerville residents say hi to me. I've reached out. I've talked with the Weber State instructor. I've also talked to the president of pickleball, and they are willing, and Steve will talk about this later in his report, to set up a field trip. So all these people and anybody from your group can come get a lesson on pickleball, and it's just not a passing fad.
No, it's not.
You know, it's huge. And so I've, in my mind, always been picturing Porter Walton. Steve today said community park like you just did. So,
If
I don't want to
somebody-
take away
if
from this. I
somebody from the
appreciate what you're
Pickleball
doing.
Association comes to me and says they'll give us $30,000 and they'll help us with professional fundraising for the rest of it, I'll be all over it.
I haven't got that far yet, but we're working on it.
Okay. That's the same thing I told the baseball people if they wanted scoreboards, is that if they'll come to me with some matching funds somewhere, I'll be to the city council meeting. But that's really what brought me to it, is that if we could do this without city funds, then it might be worth looking at.
Well, I appreciate you being sensitive to those of us who don't like corporate sponsorship as a permanent thing. But I did notice some of the corporate sponsors up there happen to be some of the same businesses we have in Centerville, like Chick-fil-A I saw up there as a sponsor. Ideally, if we were going to do something that I'd love for that to be local businesses that would be the sponsors versus national chains. But that said, I am in full support of this type of recreational use and park improvement because it does not require special equipment. You don't have to have $2,000 items to go participate in this. Anyone can do it. I've seen these actually, they are very popular in Hong Kong and in various places in China, and you will see tottering old people come up and they'll use the equipment at their intensity level, and then you'll see some teenager come tear out their shoulder doing something crazy. But they do get used to the point where the equipment is always almost in need of replacement all the time. Which would be my follow-on question is, if we build one of these, do they have any estimates on what it would take to maintain these? Because it's a neat-looking facility. How long does it last?
I haven't asked that, but I will.
That was a similar question I had. And also, if they have a commitment as to how long we have to keep it. So let's say we can't keep up on the maintenance. You know, do they have a commitment for how long we have to keep the facility and the permanent signage?
I guess it depends.
Till the pickleball court goes in its place?
Yeah, no, if it just wears out because it's out in the weather, or if it wears out because of use, then I can't see us not replacing the equipment, because you're going to have people in here saying, okay, you've got this thing down here, and we've worn it to death because it's got so much use. It's kind of hard to say we're not going to maintain it, I would think, but you know, maintenance is always an issue when you put in splash pads.
Right back at you.
That seems to be an issue. Tennis courts and pickleball courts don't require a lot of maintenance, so but some things do.
Do you think that we're going to be able to do some, I mean, I know we're supposed to do tennis courts up on Island View, but didn't you say we could actually paint pickleball courts on top of the tennis courts?
You can stripe them for pickleball courts. That's what some places have done, yes. Then you just have to figure out some way of keeping the violence down.
Keeping the peace. I think they'll be used more for tennis than they will pickleball.
Up there they would.
Dedicated courts is the way to go. I mean,
yeah.
I would definitely be in support of going after this and seeing what can be done and what the actual logistics are behind it.
Agreed.
And if we got the 30,000 from the county and then for some reason got the master plan back and said, this is really the wrong spot, and so the whole thing falls apart, can we give that 30,000 back? Can we?
I'm sure they'll take it back.
Can we just say, never mind, we want to use it for something else? Similar, but yeah, okay.
Yeah, and
then what's the harm, right? What's the harm in going forward, trying to get the grant money, and then...
As long as we have this great volunteer who's willing to...
That's right.
I just can't tell you how much we appreciate you. You are amazing.
They are misleading in that it's really $150,000 to put this thing in, because down in the fine print it says plus installation. Okay, so that means you've got to pour a cement pad, you've got to have somebody come in and install the equipment. So that when we talked, and the grant we put in, the grant application indicates that it's really $150,000. It's not the 120 in there. When you get down to really asking them, okay, well, is that an installed price? It's not. And so it's about $150,000 to put that thing in, which is about an equivalent of 4 pickleball courts.
And just so you know.
4? Isn't that, can you do that for 150, I think?
7.
7? That's even getting better. I was hoping just 2
No.
pickleball, but we need more than 2 after
No,
Four.
$150,000 is the equivalent of 7.
I think what were the estimate was it's the same price as putting in 2 tennis courts. You get
Well,
4 pickleball.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
thought 150,000 was a estimate for 2
Yeah.
tennis courts.
So I think it's
4
about the
courts.
same as you
Oh,
put-
I see. Yeah, because 4 pickleball courts will fit on 1 tennis court.
Yeah.
The thing about it too, though, is that this is such a bigger picture question, and that is just the health of a community and the costs that the community incurs when our citizens aren't healthy, et cetera, et cetera. And so as far as the corporate sponsorships and things like that, I believe that the kind of companies that would be sponsoring this are the ones who are actively encouraging health. And so those would be things that we could feel very comfortable with. And I agree with George's point that to have something that is absolutely universally usable by any age, any skill level, no training needed. I know a lot of corporations will give financial benefits to their employees for doing this 7-minute workout daily, and you record it on an app, and then you get financial incentive for that. So it's more than a trend. It's more than just something for fun. It's for the health of our community.
Well, I honestly could see them incorporating that into maybe their summer recreation program too, so that you could have a fitness program, not just for maybe 12-year-olds, but you could do it and introduce it to a lot of people.
Good point.
And it's a pretty central location for a lot of traffic, and it's got good parking already, so because of the library and other things. So.
Well, I think if we take a drive down Marketplace and hit all of our restaurants in that corridor, we probably could raise the money just off of our fast food establishments alone.
Possible.
And I'm really not opposed to corporate sponsors as long as it's not something that's questionable that we wouldn't want our children to be looking at. But if you give me money, you can put your name on them.
So that is the only remaining question, is how much control we would have over just kind of checking and verifying that we're fine with the corporate sponsors that end up on.
As long as it fit, I mean, that format was just the name of the company. If it doesn't say, you know, McDonald's, does this make you hungry? Go get a Big Mac.
Right.
That's a different type of sponsorship.
Yeah, I don't want advertising, but as long as they want to put their name on there.
Just making sure there is a check that we can kind of check, and just make sure there isn't something that we would have a problem.
Yeah, and the thing is that while they say they help, the Parks and Recreation Committee is really going to be the ones that are going to have to go out and meet these people and ask for the money. And I think we can, and we can take direction from the city that, okay, we don't want the Blue Boutique or whatever advertising on the fitness court. Although, you know, I mean, there's some fitness involved there. But,
You just made YouTube history.
Let's see, that's at 10 minutes after 9.
she's cleaned up my minutes before. It's
Oh, that one's out live. We can't pull that one back.
okay. So I guess we can proceed with it, see where it goes. If we get the grant, if we can, I'm going to tell them that, you know, I mean, we've applied for the grant, but chances are we're not going to get it. But I have to turn this application back into them with the responses that, yes, we're okay with the corporate sponsorship and with the location and that kind of stuff, so that they can proceed. They've already pretty much taken a look at it and through conversation have said that we have pre-qualified for that $30,000. But I don't know if they disqualify anybody. You know, I mean, it's like, you know, you being pre-qualified for the trip to the Bahamas. All you got to do is buy a condominium. I mean, I don't know. But at least if you're okay with this, then I'll proceed with it and then work with Steve. I can't sign this thing, so he's going to have to. Well, I could, but it just wouldn't have any value, I guess. But,
I don't want to put words in their mouth, but I don't think I am. But I think they are okay with it. But we're concerned that if the study comes back and we don't want to do it, that we're not committed, we haven't signed a contract, or they have to put the park in Porter Walton, and I think that's what they're concerned about, right?
And you may want to take a look at it. It's just an application for the grant. We're not signing a contract that I know of. And they have said that they have, if for some reason that you change your mind, priorities, different things change, that they have pulled away from projects in the past. If that comes up and we say, look, that's just not in what we need. But I don't think what we're signing is a contract. What we're asking for is an application. And if we're truthful in the application and say, well, no, if there's no money, we're not going to do it, I think we'll be okay.
Sounds good.
Go for it.
We have that direction?
Okay.
Thanks, Lynn.
Thank you, Lynn.
Lynn, thanks so much.
Give it a shot.
For everything you do.
What an
Thank you.
evening full of the value of our committees, right? And the work
That's
that
right.
they do.
Yeah. Trails, parks, yeah. Do we have more here? Okay, moving on. Anybody need a break?
Yes, please.
Do you need a break? Okay. Well, let's break for 5 minutes or so. Okay? Great.
3 doesn't get you out the door.
Depends on how chatty